我的麦手机 phone my phone 我的手机
我手机呢？你有没有看到我手机？
Why did she say 我手机 instead of 我的手机? That's not how I learned it. What's going on?
Hello, 大家好, I'm Grace from Grace Mandarin Chinese. 的 is a very important function word in Chinese, but it tends to cause some confusion because sometimes we use it and sometimes we don't use it, while basically expressing the same meaning. So in today's video, we're going to figure out why sometimes native Chinese speakers leave out the de. By knowing this, you can also make your Chinese sound more natural. Before we go into the details, let's first review the basic use of de. De can be used to show possession, and the common structure is pronoun or noun plus de plus noun. For example, 我的爸爸，我的爸爸，他的电脑，他的电脑，学校的餐厅，学校的餐厅，宿舍的厕所，宿舍的厕所。De can also be used when you want to describe a noun or to add more details to the noun. The structure would be description plus de plus noun. The description can be adjectives, time words, or phrases, etc. For example, 漂亮的眼睛，漂亮的眼睛。昨天的新闻，昨天的新闻。我上个月买的书，我上个月买的书。So you can see that as a function word, de can be used to show the relationships between words. However, let's take a look at the following examples. To say new phone, we can either say 新的手机 or 新手机。To say my father, other than saying 我的爸爸, we can also say 我爸爸. If whether to use de is completely the same in every aspect, then there's no need for both of them to exist in the language, right? So now let's take a look at the difference between them. Generally speaking, when using de, you can think of A and B as two individual parts. For example, 新鲜的水果 fresh fruit. It's used like a phrase, and since 新鲜 and 水果 are considered two individual parts, we can even add some words to modify either of them. For example, we can say 很新鲜的一篮水果，很新鲜的一篮水果。We can add 很 very before the adjective 新鲜 and 一篮 a basket before the noun 水果 and say 很新鲜的一篮水果 to express a basket of fresh fruit. However, you might also hear people say 新鲜水果 without using de. So why is this? When we omit de, you may notice that these two individual parts stick together. In this case, they are considered as a single unit and function more like a compound word. Since we're using it as a word, we can even use adjectives to modify it. For example, 好吃的新鲜水果，好吃的新鲜水果 tasty fresh fruit. So remember, when we leave out the function word de, the words are combined and treated as one unit. Here are some examples of words often used without de. 我爸爸，我家，我们班，冰咖啡。Can you guess why they don't need the? It's because we use these words frequently in our daily conversations. When we talk about them, they naturally work together as a single unit. So the isn't needed. Here are situations where the is often omitted. First, when it involves relationships with others, like when talking about family members or significant others. Here are some examples. 我爷爷，我爷爷，你姐姐，你姐姐，我朋友，我朋友，她男朋友，她男朋友。Second, when talking about a group where you or others belong to, such as family, school, or the workplace. For example, 我家，我家，他们学校，他们学校，你们公司，你们公司，我们国家，我们国家。When referring to a group, we tend to use plural pronouns because there are usually many people involved. The third situation where the is often omitted is when one-character adjectives are modifying nouns by themselves. Here are some examples. 新书，新书，冰奶茶，冰奶茶，热水，热水，强风，强风。In these three situations, the tends to be omitted, but sometimes you will hear people adding the function word the to them. For example, 我的爸爸，他们的学校，新的书，etc. When the is added to them, it's usually to emphasize the word that precedes it. For example, when you say 新书, it means new book. But if you want to emphasize the word 新, new, you can say 新的书，新的书。你想要哪本？这本是新的，这本是二手的。我想要那本新的书。Here she adds the after 新 because she wants to emphasize that it's the new one she wants. So now you know some combinations of words are often used without the because they are frequently lumped together. Next, let's move on and talk about words that are not as commonly used as a unit. In such cases, we typically use the to indicate the relationship between the words, so it's easier to understand. For example, 我的手，我的手，我朋友的电脑，我朋友的电脑，昨天的新闻，昨天的新闻。The tricky part is that the is sometimes omitted in these words. This happens because when these combinations are used in a sentence, they can sometimes be treated as one unit, functioning more like a compound word. Therefore, the can be omitted. Here are some examples. 我的手，我的手，我手，我手。你做到我手了啊！对不起，对不起。我朋友的电脑，我朋友的电脑，我朋友电脑，我朋友电脑。我不小心弄坏了我朋友电脑，你会修电脑吗？我不小心弄坏了我朋友电脑，你会修电脑吗？ I accidentally broke my friend's computer. Can you repair computers? 昨天的新闻，昨天的新闻，昨天新闻， 昨天新闻，你有没有看到昨天新闻的头条？你有没有看到昨天新闻的头条？ Did you see yesterday's news headline? In Chinese, we prefer not to use too many 的 in a phrase, so it sounds unnatural to say 昨天的新闻的头条。Here, we know the main noun we want to modify is the last one, 头条, so we can drop the 的 between 昨天 and 新闻。However, if you want to emphasize that the news is from yesterday, you can add 的 after 昨天, but to avoid using too many 的, you should delete the 的 between 新闻 and 头条, considering them as a unit, and say 昨天的新闻头条。Alright, I understand that's a lot of information, so let's do a quick recap. Generally speaking, when two words are often used together as a single unit in both idea and function, we tend not to use 的 between them. For example, 我爸爸，我家，他们学校， etc. We will add 的 when we want to put more emphasis on the first word. Like if I said 他们的学校, it emphasized that it's their school, not ours or yours. For other words less commonly used together as a unit, we normally add 的 to them, such as 我的手，昨天的新闻. But when they're in a sentence and used as a unit, the 的 between them can be omitted, especially when we have too many 的 in a phrase. Deciding when to use 的 can be a bit tricky sometimes, but I believe that today's lesson is going to help you start making sense of it all. I suggest listening and reading more Chinese so you will get the feel of 的。那如果你喜欢今天的影片，别忘记按赞、订阅和分享哦。And also, if you'd like to learn some daily Mandarin expressions, check out my Instagram, Grace Mandarin. 那我们下次见喽，拜拜。